Good afternoon and welcome to this plenary session, the Gang of Four, for Retrospective. My name is Micah Watson. I have the privilege of being the third director of the Paul Henry Institute for the Study of Christianity and Politics. I'm standing right next to the inaugural director of the same institute. This session is particularly special because in it we get to recognize and learn from a group of scholars who have had a remarkable impact not only on the discipline of political science, but the larger intersection between faith and public life. This session can be characterized not only as a retrospective, but also as something like the reveal of a good detective mystery. The mystery goes something like this. Today, it is entirely normal for professors, grad students, undergraduates, and citizens to study and acknowledge the relationship between religion and politics. Students can study that relationship. Grad students can learn and employ social science methodology, provide new insights into the relationship. Scholars write books, conduct surveys, and otherwise contribute to this important field of religion and politics. Needless to say, pundits and journalists depend on this work to better inform the public, or at least they should depend more on this work. That religion might tell us something about political reality, and that what politics might affect religion seems perfectly normal and expected now. But as we'll learn from our panelists, it was not always so. Just 2 generations roughly ago, studying the relationship between religion and politics was rather rare. How did that change? Kevin Den Dulk, former Henry director and grad student workshop attendee, wrote this about our panelists today. Those 4 were key people in the 1980s in starting to focus the attention of political science on the intersection of religion and politics. Not only were they path-breaking in terms of the use of methods of political science to show the impact of religion in public life, but they also started to convene younger scholars in ways that developed networks that became a subculture of science. 4 people: Corwin Smidt, emeritus at Calvin; James Guth, the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor at Furman; Lyman Bud Kellstedt, emeritus at Wheaton College; and John Green, distinguished professor emeritus at the University of Akron. Fortunately, John cannot be with us today, but we're very fortunate to have Corwin, Jim, and Bud here to unravel the mystery for us. We'll first hear from our 3 panelists, and then we'll hear from 2 scholars who will share what the Gang of Four's work has meant to them: David Campbell of Notre Dame and Tobin Grant of Southern Illinois. Following that, we will have time for audience Q&A. Would you please join me in showing our appreciation and welcoming the work and legacy and the people who make up the Gang of Four.
Well, it's indeed an honor to have this plenary session serve as a reflection on our work over the past 40 years. I think I'm going to have to hold this. My eyes are not nearly as good as they once were, so I'm going to, rather than keep it down here. Anyway, it's indeed an honor to have this plenary session serve as a reflection on our work over the past 40 years. Unfortunately, as it was noted, John Green was unable to join us today, but John has contributed to this presentation, and he has served as an important member of our joint endeavors. Given this opportunity today, we have decided to take this time to reflect a little on the historical background to the subfield of religion and politics, how the 4 of us came together, along with some of the endeavors in which we have engaged. We have organized our presentation in terms of a historical overview, with each of us here presenting different aspects of this historical reflection. As noted, there will be a couple people talking about their brief reflections on what we have done, and then if there are questions, we would be happy to try to answer them at the end. The context for holding this plenary session is that this past summer, the Gang of Four received the inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award from the Religion and Politics section of the American Political Science Association. Needless to say, each of us were surprised and humbled when we were informed of receiving this inaugural award. Certainly, when we began our careers, it was inconceivable for us to have even contemplated receiving such an award. Though there are certainly a variety of reasons why such an award could not have been anticipated, one very important reason is that when we began our graduate studies in the 1960s and 70s, religion did not exist as a subfield of study within political science. This neglect of religion was due in large part to transformations in political science after World War II, especially the so-called behavioral revolution. The natural sciences became the established model for inquiry, and normative concerns were pushed to the sidelines. Accordingly, discussions of how religious values might be related to politics were deemed inappropriate. Not only were discussions of the impact of religious faith discouraged, but the dominant theoretical perspective of the day, secularization theory, assumed that religion itself was irrelevant to modern politics, little more than a dying vestige of pre-modern societies. No doubt, the dominance of secularization theory owed something to the well-documented secularism of most social scientists at this time. In addition, a quasi-Marxism prevailed in political science departments, seeing politics as simply a function of economic life. The contemporary concept of cultural politics was simply unknown. Liberalism and conservatism were understood in economic, not cultural terms. Even the 1960 presidential election, in which our first Catholic president proved to many observers that religion was irrelevant to American politics, as a long-standing religious barrier to office seemingly ending. This happened despite the almost universal Catholic vote for Kennedy and strong Protestant support for Richard Nixon. As a result of these influences, political scientists missed the initial stirrings of some important religious developments, especially the political emergence of American evangelicals. Conservative Christians were moving from the sidelines of American society to greater political engagement. After the formation of the National Association of Evangelicals in 1943, evangelicals spent 3 decades trying to differentiate themselves from their more fundamentalist brethren. And public visibility of evangelical Christians had grown due to the prominence of leaders such as Billy Graham, but also to the successful presidential candidacy of Jimmy Carter in 1996, leading to a Newsweek cover story calling 1976 Year of the Evangelical. And although Carter's religiosity in office was often a subject of journalistic attention, the late 1970s did not see a wave of analysis by political scientists in terms of the role that religion was playing in American politics. But changes were in the wings. How then did religion and politics become a legitimate subfield recognized by a large organized section of the American Political Science Association? Although a big part of this explanation is the events of the political world that made it impossible to ignore religion, the development of a disciplinary subfield also reflected organizational factors, such as the efforts of the Caucus on Faith and Politics and the formation of important scholarly networks. Let me briefly discuss the Caucus on Faith and Politics. Prior to the formation of organized sections, the APSA recognized various unaffiliated groups, which would convene at annual meetings with the details printed in the official program, though one would have to make a concerted effort to try to find this information in the program itself. My first encounter with the Caucus on Faith and Politics was when I was a graduate student at the University of Iowa, attending a breakfast meeting at the 1974 APSA meeting in Chicago. This may well have been the first caucus meeting. I'm not certain, but I am inclined to think that the gathering was largely due to the organizational efforts of the late Congressman Paul Henry, at the time a professor of political science here at Kelvin, and for whom the Henry Institute was named. And in fact, this breakfast meeting may have been an outgrowth of the annual Conference on Christianity and Politics held at Kelvin College. The fourth and final such conference of that series was in April 1977, shortly before Henry left Kelvin for political life. Following the APSA gathering in 1974, there were several efforts by the caucus to assemble Christian political scientists at APSA meetings. Typically, a Christian political scientist would give a paper presentation, followed by comments and questions from attendees. Although these presentations were listed in the program, they were scheduled during regular meeting times and as a result were not very well attended. Given that the caucus had no formal organization nor any useful mailing list, and these were the days before email, attendance was largely dependent on conferencees reading their programs carefully and then opting for the caucus session over a competing official panel. In the early 1980s, however, political events came to the rescue. Scholarly interest in the role of religion in American politics was piqued in the early 1980s by the rise of the moral majority, the election of Ronald Reagan, and the defeat of several liberal Senate Democrats seeking re-election. In response, some conference participants decided to encourage scholars to present research on religion and politics at caucus sessions, regardless of their particular religious perspective. Moreover, given an organizational restructuring of the American Political Science Association, the caucus was now a so-called related group, allowing it to organize competing panels during regular conference hours, if sometimes held outside the conference hotel. The attendance at these related group sessions counted towards the number of panels allotted at the next conference, just as was the case for the official APSA panels. These religion and politics panels began to attract a fair number of attendees, due in part to interest in the topic, with a growing network of scholars doing relevant research. Given the bolstered attendance at these religion and politics panels, the caucus was able to maintain or even expand the number of panels allocated at the next meeting. And by 1981, the regular APSA program featured a few panels with papers on religion and politics. In 1986, a major junction in the study of religion and politics occurred when the APSA created organized sections as a permanent part of its structure. To become a section, one had, at the time at least, had to get 250 members willing to pay an additional fee for membership within the section over and above one's APSA membership fee. Members of the Caucus on Faith and Politics took a lead in gathering the required 250 paying signatures from among the past panel participants and others interested in the topic, aided also by some eminent scholars such as the late Aaron Wildowski. As a result, the Religion and Politics section became the 11th APSA section in organization.
Thank you, Corwin. Corwin comes from a Reformed tradition and is always in favor of doing things decently and in order. I'm kind of Baptist, and so I'm in favor of decency, not necessarily order. Bud doesn't care much about either, but we'll proceed. And so I may digress a little bit from my printed program that Corwin distributed here. Like a lot of us in kind of the original core of religion and politics scholars, I come from the Midwest. It seemed like we had a large group of us, predominantly from the Midwest. And I think that kind of reflects the same experience I had growing up in a very religiously diverse area. Most of us were farmers, but we had German Catholics and Norwegian Lutherans and German Lutherans. And one of the things we noticed very quickly, even as kids, is that German Catholics were all Democrats and Norwegian Lutherans were all Republicans. And German Lutherans didn't know what they were, and we Baptists were pretty Republican. And growing up in a Baptist church, there was a lot of discussion of politics, especially surrounding the rising power of the State of Israel in the Middle East and the Goldwater movement, which was attracting some conservative Christians. And so even as a young person, I had a lot of interest in religion and politics. And at the University of Wisconsin, one of my mentors there, Leon Epstein, wrote a little book which wouldn't seem to have anything to do with religion and politics. It was called Politics in Wisconsin, which was a kind of a narrow topic, but it had a nice chapter on religion and politics in Wisconsin, which I really enjoyed. And I went up to graduate school and I started studying political philosophy with Michael Walzer and read The Revolution of the Saints and decided that there was really not only some contemporary warrant, but some historical warrant in studying religion and politics. And so when I went to teach at Furman in 1974, I started a course that was entitled Religion and Politics. I had some trouble persuading my colleagues to approve the course, but they finally did, and I've been kind of teaching that ever since. But I think that indicates some of the personal elements that goes into all of our interests, and you will read or hear about some of the other folks in the Gang of Four and what their backgrounds have led them to, but we see some kind of interesting questions in sociology of knowledge there about why we got into the field of religion and politics. As Corwin indicated, one of the important aspects of this field, and one of the things that I've appreciated so much over the years, is the kind of camaraderie which the people engaged in this field have exhibited and the kind of cooperative research enterprise and spirit that I think is, I don't know if it's unique among organized sections of the APSA, but I think it's certainly uncharacteristic of a lot of academic areas. And a lot of these networks came together in interesting ways. And the Gang of Four started out as kind of two dyads, Green and me. John was at Furman for 10 years before he moved to the University of Akron, and Bud and Corwin came together in a somewhat different fashion. I started studying religion and politics as a scholar in the 1970s when I had an undergraduate who providentially, I think, asked me to help him with a study of clergy in the Greenville, South Carolina area. He did a very fine survey of several hundred clergy, which we punched onto cards and then put some SPSS control cards at the front of the deck and persuaded the mainframe operator on our campus to do it between payroll and other considerations, and did a little article that was later published in a book by Merle and Earl Black, and that was my introduction. My co-author went off to become the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in the United States after an unrewarding career as a lawyer. He went into the clergy, perhaps reflecting his earlier interest. So when the moral majority appeared on the scene, unfortunately another providential act, I was asked if I could spend some grant money that Furman had that had to be spent by the 1st of January 1981. And I thought immediately of doing a study of Southern Baptist clergy and their reaction to the moral majority. And I said, sure, I can. And so I got a questionnaire, basically stolen from Harold Quinley's book, in his California study and sent out 1,500 mimeographed question and paper questionnaires with return envelopes in. We discovered that 10 pages of print was a little too much, so I had to cut off half of the last page to get it under an ounce to stay within the budget. But nevertheless, it went out with the help of my son, who licked all the stamps and has never forgiven me. And we got a 72% response rate back in those days, which is something we don't really expect anymore. So I've been doing that. John had just come to Furman and was just finishing up his dissertation. But when he finished, we decided that we were going to kind of merge our interest in political activism of all sorts. And so we took a random sample of political action committee contributors of all sorts and included a number of religious items on the surveys. And this is where we really got started. John had been doing, his dissertation was on the impact of political contributions on congressional voting, but he was really interested in the people who were giving the money. And so we sent out several thousand questionnaires and got started doing religion and politics among political contributors. I kept my Baptist clergy thing going for for the next 4 years. And we really began to get much more interest in this idea of the connection between religion and politics. Corwin and I met at a Citadel Symposium on Southern Politics in 1982, in which we both presented papers. Bud and Corwin were in correspondence about the same time and developed some common interest. And we're not really sure, but we think the first time we all got together on a panel was in 1983 was it an APSA meeting, I think? I couldn't remember if it was Midwest or APSA. And after that, we began to meet pretty regularly and talk about common interest of one sort or another. The events intertwine, and my memory is no better than Corwin's or Bud's at exactly which came first, but we began to engage in a number of common enterprises. One of these was in 1988 when we decided that we were going to kind of link up at the last minute on a cooperative clergy survey. I had been doing Southern Baptist. I was going to be doing it again. One of my colleagues at Furman had gotten a grant from Lilly to help study the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. The director of that grant says, I've got plenty of money. Why don't you study the Baptist, the Disciples of Christ, and the PCUSA clergy? So we had 3 denominations. Somehow I talked Corwin into doing the RCA and the CRC, and John agreed. He had just moved to Akron, and he agreed to do the UMC, his home church, and Margaret Paloma was especially interested in Pentecostals, so she was going to do the Assemblies of God. And so we pieced together a kind of common questionnaire, not quite common enough because Corwin had to put all those reformed items in his and mess things up, but we did have some diversity in our questionnaires. But that resulted in a number of different papers during the early 1990s. Corwin and Bud also participated in a book that we published, The Bible in the Ballot Box, in 1991, looking at different groups of evangelical and voting. And so we were working in a number of different settings. After the clergy study, we got money for a study of religious group activists. This was especially attractive to us because it allowed us to test out among religious groups from left to right, evangelical, mainline Protestant, even some Catholics, try out different kinds of religious questions. So it was kind of a preliminary run on some of the items which we later helped develop for the national election studies. And we did a study of, I think, 7 or 8 different interest groups, focused on the family, bread for the world, very interesting effort, and published a number of articles in which we used that data. Unfortunately, We never did do a book. We should have probably on religious activist groups, but time and chance sometimes prevent you from doing everything you would like. And one of the reasons why we probably didn't go further with that was that we had an opportunity to do a big national sample. And that was big for us back in the days, and we couldn't put a module on CES or things like that. But we were going to get an opportunity to ask a nice large national sample, all sorts of religious questions. And we found out all sorts of things in our joint experience. I still remember us sitting at Akron and Jesse Marquette telling us on the second day of our joint enterprise that the questionnaire wasn't working, that we were getting too big a fall-off rate in our telephone contacts. And we discovered the reason why pretty quickly. We had religious questions up front, and immediately upon hearing the religious questions, respondents dropped off. So next night on the test run, we reversed it, put politics up front. Nobody blanched, so we had a much better response rate. Lots of fun doing that. And this was a part of a larger enterprise with other scholars, David Leahy and Ken Wald, Ted Jelen, Clyde Wilcox, in a pilot study that was going on about the same time that the ANES was doing on religious items. And if you're interested in the outcome of that, the Leahy Kellstedt book, Rediscovering the Religious Factor, is a very good story of how we looked at different kinds of potential questions and what they meant. Some of those ventures didn't go very far. Others were incorporated in the ANES, especially the RELTRAD that Bud's going to be talking about. But in the process of doing this, we were really engaging with and benefiting from all sorts of group exchanges. Our network was growing, and that allowed us in a lot of ways to expand the kinds of enterprises that we were undertaking. And I think one of the things that has impressed me most about the way in which the Gang of Four worked for many, many, many years is that all of us brought different strengths to the process. And that's one of the great advantages of teamwork. And I think for those of you who are just getting started in the discipline, maybe this comes as second nature. At the time we started out, political science was much more an individualistic enterprise, and we learned that you could really do a lot more if you combined your strengths. Corwin has a great deal of tolerance for reading every journal article ever written about a particular theoretical topic and drafting a magnificent, monumental literature review. I don't like to do that. Corwin, he's a masochist, I guess. He just loves that sort of thing. Bud and I love to, turn data over and over again. John Green was great at the catchy title and coming up with interesting ways of interpreting data that the rest of us just didn't see. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us. That none of us are good at everything, and we can really benefit from the networks that we develop. One thing that I think also is important is we had a hell of a very good time. I forgot where I was. We had a great time during the 25 years we worked together, and I think that also is important. That's why some of us are still here doing this way beyond the years in which we are superannuated, because it's just a lot of fun working together on joint projects. And we're still engaged in that enterprise, and I suspect we will be for a good bit longer. Bud's going to talk about some of the important innovations in our findings.
Corwin asked me if I needed a wheelchair, and given my age, to make it. In my case, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois. Peoria, Illinois, to this day, from the the year of my birth, 1933, has never had a Democratic member of Congress. Everett Dirksen was my first congressman. Kind of an interesting element, this great man. My brother, at age 32, challenged the Republican Party in a race for state's attorney in a primary election, and he won. And he won because he knew how to campaign. And I was a young kid working on that campaign. My father had a great interest in politics, and a few of you might even remember some of the people my father loved. Harold Stassen was one of his absolute favorites. And in 1940, he really liked Wendell Willkie. When it came to Eisenhower and Taft, oh man, we lost. We won that one. In other words, he preferred Eisenhower to Taft. So I grew up in a political family. Did I grow up in a religious family? I grew up in the most liberal Presbyterian church in the city of Peoria. And in point of fact, most of the people there were fairly wealthy. It was an upper middle class church. And after church, everyone went to the country club for lunch and that. So at about age 12 or 13, I told my parents, I'm no longer going to go. Golf is more important. And I haven't learned anything at the church. A few years later, I'm age 20, I spied this gorgeous woman. And I found out within a few days, she wasn't a strong Christian, she was a strong Lutheran. And it seemed to me, I'm either going to become a Lutheran or I'm not going to have any relationship with this young woman. So I took personal, individualized confirmation lessons from a pastor and became a Lutheran. As we went to grad school and I took some of my first professional jobs, like many of you do when you're scouting around for churches when you move. In our case, we scouted Lutheran churches. And we were even willing to go to Missouri Synod churches, or well, there was no ELCA in those days, American Lutheran churches, LCA, depending on the preacher and the style of preaching. We moved to the University of Illinois Chicago in the late 60s. It was the year that the Cubs collapsed and the Mets. So here, as a lifelong Cardinal fan, I move into Chicago area and see all these poor Cub fans just suffering. But a great thing happened. A woman, the wife of a pastor of the Western Springs Baptist Church, knocked on our door. There had been a sickness of one of our kids at school, and her kid was the same age. She heard about that. She knocked on the door. She invited my wife to come to the Western Springs Baptist Church. My wife begged me. I said, Baptist? George Wallace? Yeah, that was my perspective. We went, we were greeted with love in a manner unbelievable. The pastor of that church at that time, 1 month ago, celebrated his 100th birthday, skiing at Breckenridge, and on Facebook showing dancing with his granddaughter. An amazing man, a replacement for Billy Graham, whose only pastorate was at the Western Springs Baptist Church. That's my religious kind of background. Being then a self-identified evangelical, having going to that Baptist church, I became a friend of the editor of Christianity Today. Christianity Today commissioned in the late 70s a massive survey by the Gallup organization. What Gallup did was he turned over a mountain of computer output that was approximately a yard high. And the editor of Christianity Today had absolutely no idea what to do with those data. So Bud got brought in not to write things. By the way, you could find those articles if you went into the archives of Christianity Today. And it's not very good social science, if you want to know the truth. What I did help them, I made sure the percentages added up and, made a few dumb suggestions. All of that led me eventually, in a year or two later, to come to Wheaton College, where, because I had worked with these data on religion, at Wheaton, you have to write a tenure paper if you're going to get tenure. So nobody comes into Wheaton College with tenure. I wrote a tenure paper on defining evangelicalism from different perspectives. And what I found was nobody had a clue of pretty much what they were talking about. Even these historians had one view, sociologists had another view, no political scientists were working with it, so that we didn't count. And so my tenure paper passed, and I got tenure, and by golly, very shortly thereafter, I met the great Corwin Smidt. And Corwin, in his kind and usual manner that you'd expect from Corwin, not from Bud, invited me to lunch at an APSA meeting, and by golly, from that, we decided to write a paper on fundamentalism that got published. I remember Corwin was a little angry at me because, I like to delay things. Measurement error is sin, as I've indicated in earlier comments, and therefore we had to get the measurement error out of the fundamentalism paper. And Corwin said, "Are we ever going to get this published?" But we did. Now, a key element after the early 80s was the APSA, the American National Election Studies, decided to conduct a pilot study. And I was a part of a committee involving David Leahy, Ken Wald, and a sociologist, Wade Clark Roof. And we gathered in South Bend, ate at some fantastic restaurants. Leahy knew all the places to go, and we sat around and made up questions that the National Election Studies put in their pilot study. Now, the major and most significant result of the pilot study in terms of getting something accomplished was they accepted a religious code. And that religious code, with tweaks, is still in existence today, used by the American National Election Studies. Now, Bud tried hard, but Bud's not very persuasive, and I tried hard. We've got to have more beliefs than this simple, poorly worded Bible item. But I could not get my fellow political scientists to agree. And so we never got any other religious belief questions as a result of the pilot study. And I think that's really unfortunate, because a God item would have been extremely valuable, maybe something better than the GSS item on life after death. Just a few items where we could have had a kind of orthodoxy measure. We've never been able to successfully do that. But out of the pilot study, relationships, I'd known Dave Leahy since 1965 when we went to ICPSR for the summer. And we had been colleagues, both at the SUNY Buffalo and at the University of Illinois Chicago, before Dave left to eventually end up at Notre Dame. So we had ties there, and Jim has already mentioned some of the ties that the Gang of Four had developed. So we got together, I'll never forget this as long as I live, at a meeting in Pittsburgh. Dave Leahy was completely in charge of the meeting and eventually assigning topics that we would write about for the book that came out in 1993. So the pilot study was a really critical development, and out of the reconstructing book, rediscovering the religious factor in American politics. Really, we needed somebody to come up with a better title, but whatever. We developed the concept of religious tradition, or as we call it, RELTRAD. And if you look at the code in the back of a chapter that John Green and I wrote in that book, the code looks pretty good, even by today's standards. It's been tweaked, and other denominations that weren't very present, particularly in the small studies that we had at that time, were not included. But generally speaking, it grasps something, I think, important. And in fact, RELTRAD, today, all of you who've studied religion and politics have heard of the concept and seen its use. And I think it's the best contribution that the Gang 4 has ever made. Now, I was also asked to talk about the surveys that were done at the University of Akron. And this would have been left to John, where the surveys were done. And so John knows the details of all the kind of stuff, and the rest of us were we were observers and participants in all of that, but in terms of the details, but drawing on the insights from some of the surveys that we had done, including the religious activist survey that got mentioned by Jim. A couple comments about that. I wasn't thinking of this, and Corwin had not asked me to include this, but two organizations were particularly important in terms of getting them to participate. And one was Focus on the Family, James Dobson's organization. Let me tell you, you write a letter to James Dobson, who made almost all the decisions for Focus on the Family at that time. Let me tell you. But we didn't do that. But we met his vice president at a meeting, and we said to him, we'd like to do a survey, and if you'll provide us the list that we can draw a sample, we'll provide you with a detailed report on the results. And he said, yeah, that sounds good. So we did it. We got pretty good results in terms of response rate, but some of the members who'd gotten the questionnaire wrote to Dobson complaining. I thought we were not ever supposed to be recipients of surveys like this. And Dobson told them, don't participate. But I think most people didn't do that, and we got a pretty good response. The other group that was really incredible that we got response is Concerned Women for America. Concerned Women for America still exists, but at that point of time, we wanted to include them as the largest conservative, politically women's organization in the United States. Corwin and I went to their headquarters in downtown Washington. Let me tell you, the carpet was a foot thick. The headquarters of Concerned Women for America was completely plush. The day before, we'd visited Bread for the World, where you felt you were in a factory setting. The comparison of the amount of money that went into the accoutrements was incredible. Well, we were supposed to meet with the president of Concerned Women for America. We sat there and we sat there. Secretary began to feel sorry for us. Would you like a cup of coffee, et cetera? Well, Corwin always wants a cup of coffee. So we had a cup of coffee. Well, it's still, we weren't seeing her. So finally she came up and said, would you like to look at our Concerned Women for America magazine? So we said, sure. We opened it up, and by golly, in both of the issues we looked at, there was lists of members of Concerned Women for America with the hometowns and their phone numbers. Now, by golly, they didn't have their street addresses. So a former student of mine, Chris Fastenau, and I, well, all we had was 2 magazines. But I said, I know that my sister-in-law in Omaha is a member of Concerned Women for America, and she's never thrown away anything she's ever received. And so the next time we went to Omaha, I go down in the basement. There was a mountain this high of magazines from Concerned Women for America. So I borrowed them, we took them home, and Chris Fastenau and I went over to the Institute for the Study of American Evangelicals at Wheaton College, used their phones at the end of the day and called all these women. And by golly, they all said they'd do this. I mean, they were a piece of cake. So now we had 2 really interesting groups focus on the family and Concerned Women for America. And yes, it is sad that we never published a book on that, but it helped us develop questions that have paid off over the years in a dramatic fashion. So there we go. So at any rate, John pioneered at Akron a survey that we did in 1992 with a sizable sample, as I recall, close to 4,000, which is really a large sample at that point of time. We were able to get money over the years from Pew, and so we did follow-up surveys in 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and then a smaller sample in 2012. And an awful lot of our work has flowed from that kind of thing. So with that, I will cease. It's Reltrad, baby.
Well, you can see that I can't rein these guys in because I had prepared a paper that they were supposed to read from, and they took some liberties with it, and that's fine. That's fine. But just to give you a sense, though, of what we did go to Zondervan Publishing Company with a book proposal using these religious activists. And we thought this was going to be a great thing. I mean, we had all these different respondents, and we thought that people in the pews would be very interested in what we were finding in terms of these surveys. And so they looked at the proposal, and probably about 2 months later, maybe a month later, I'm not certain how much time had elapsed, but they took us to lunch, and they said, yeah, we really like your proposal. And they said, yeah, we think we could sell 10,000 copies. Well, for a scholarly publication, that's pretty good. But they said, we don't want it because it's not enough copies to really make a profit. So that was sort of a downer for us. We thought we were really on the top of the world for a minute, but then that fell through. But then shortly thereafter, we had the Pew survey for 1992, and that's one of the reasons why that particular religious activist project never got a book proposal out of it. Well, I do want to just end, too, a little bit about the legacy of what's happened through some of these Pew surveys. The 1996 Pew survey that we did had money to hold a graduate student workshop. And so in 1996, we convened a group of young graduate students who were interested in religion and politics to come to Wheaton to basically work with our data and receive some instructions in terms of what we had learned about religion and politics and how that might be applied to their kinds of interests in terms of religion and what they might be studying with regard to politics. So that really was a very important event because there were a lot of young graduate students who has subsequently become very established and well-respected scholars in the field both of sociology of religion and in the field of politics and religion.
I might say that it's sad that the sociologists who were a part of that haven't been able to come to this event. I turned over a coding scheme for the general social surveys, which those 5 sociologists turned in to a social forces article that was the most cited social forces article in the first decade of 2000. And every one of those 5, well, one is a CIA person, so he left academia. Don't ask me what he's doing because I don't have a clue. But the other 4 or 5, because there may have been 6 of them, all got major university appointments in their first job appointment. And it flowed from that article.
So 1996 was the first graduate student workshop we held, but then we did not hold any other ones until the Henry Institute was established, and as one of the endeavors that I commenced as the director of the Henry Institute was to re-inaugurate the graduate student workshop. And so we held the graduate student workshop starting in 2000. I believe it was 2000 was our first, actually it was 2001, and we had 12 graduate students attend. The way I had structured it was that we would have the graduate student workshop one year and then the symposium on religion and politics the next year, and then we would do another graduate student workshop. And we had limited funds by which to conduct this, and so we were limiting our graduate student workshops to 12. However, I did receive a grant to do a national survey in 2008, and with that grant, I also received money then to conduct some more graduate student workshops. So then on an annual basis, we began to hold the graduate student workshop with about 25 or 26 graduate students, depending upon who applied and the funds that were available. But these graduate student workshops really were a source of enjoyment. Jim and Bud and I would come together for a week in the summer, bring the graduate students. They stayed here at the Prince Conference Center. We went next door to work on the computer areas in which we had, and so we went through a series of different topics that we addressed, and which we found time to both get to know students and also enjoy what they had to offer in terms of helping us also understand religion. So we this is a sort of a mutual learning endeavor. So anyway, my point is that we've had a great deal of fun together. We hope that we have contributed in a meaningful way to the study of religion, both in terms of its organizational structure, but also in terms of how we go about examining that particular topic. And we hope that we've contributed to a new generation of scholars that have worked in this field. And we look forward to reading more of the accomplishments of the students that we've had in these various workshops. So thank you very much.
I don't know if David or Tobin is coming up first. All right, so David Campbell of Notre Dame.
It is truly an honor here today to talk about the Gang of Four. I say that because when I started graduate school in the mid-1990s, I was told by multiple faculty, actually, in our graduate program, that the study of religion was a growth stock. And I had a little experience with religion. I'd lived in Provo, Utah, so it seemed obvious to me that religion affected politics, and then I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where there wasn't as much religion, but there was still a lot of politics, and so that struck me as accurate. Well, it is very true that the study of religion and politics was a growth stock. But what you have before you here today are those who got in at on the ground floor. I was trying to think of the right analogy. They are the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, the Hewlett and Packard of the study of religion and politics. And I thought I might just take a minute and talk a little bit first about the influence of the Gang of Four on the study of religion and politics, both within political science, but also, as was mentioned, in sociology, and frankly, in disciplines even beyond that. Corwin mentioned the workshop that took place there in the mid-1990s, and there are a number of us here today who were at that workshop. But I want to pause for a moment and reflect on just what a remarkable event that was, and I don't think any of us at the time realized it, that if you look across both political science and sociology, virtually everyone who has gone on to build a career studying religion and politics was present at that workshop. And I am very grateful for that myself, not only for what I learned professionally, but also because I made a number of friends. Those kinds of relationships are, I think, equally important. So one way to think about the influence of the Gang of Four is they've had a ripple effect. They did some important things that then rippled through academia. I'd also note that at that workshop in the mid-1990s, it meant that all of us who assembled got a little taste of what we've also had today that I like to think of as the Bud Kellstedt experience. I have a memory, I don't even know how this happened, but for some reason, Bud, who at the time was dressed in a neon green tank top and a baseball cap and shorts that were just way too short, I remember you jumping up on a table for some reason, I think to make a point. Anyway, that image I will never be able to get that out of my head. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with that in my mind. For me personally, having attended that one workshop, it caused me to reflect a little bit on how the study of religion and politics has not only grown, but it's become multi-generational. So I learned from them. My own PhD student, Andre Audet, is here. He has his students, and that's just going to continue to ripple through. But you know, it goes beyond any one event. The Gang of Four are known for being remarkably generous in their time, in their thoughts. I think any of us who've been working on religion and politics over the last few decades can attest that at any political science conference of any size, these scholars were there. They're there in the panels. They were there as discussants. We could not possibly count the number of conversations, the number of reviews, the number of emails, the number of Bud-isms that we all experienced to our benefit. And if I stopped here, if I said that was it, that was their influence, that would be impressive enough. That would be a reason to hold an event like this. That would warrant the Lifetime Achievement Award that they've received. But there's more. And I actually want to make this point because I do fear that we perhaps focus too much on what the Gang of Four have done for the study of religion and politics within the discipline of political science and perhaps in sociology as well. But their influence goes way beyond that. And I want to underscore that. It goes way beyond that because, as you got a hint of in their remarks, religion went from an area that almost nobody studied to a topic now that people just can't stop talking about. And so every time you read an article or a book, whether it be scholarly or not, and you hear references to the measurement of religious traditions or the 3 Bs, belonging, believing, and behaving, and a wide variety of other things, those innovations came here from these scholars. And that's not limited to a small club of people working on religion and politics. That goes far beyond. And you know, it's all the more impressive that they did this as pioneers, as was hinted at. there was nobody else doing this at the time. And it's even more impressive that they did this outside of major research universities, which means they weren't working with their own PhD students. They were working with the rest of us, and they were continuing to teach their undergraduate students and influencing their education as well. And so I am confident, standing here before you today, that I speak for the many, many, many students and scholars who have been influenced over the years by the truly path-breaking work of the Gang of Four. But if I could, I'd like to close by sharing my own gratitude personally. That workshop was seminal for me personally, put my career on a path that I've followed ever since. It enabled me to make friends that have carried through decades. And so, and I apologize for my emotion, but, and so to the Gang of Four, I speak for a generation of scholars and say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I agree 100%, 110%, but it'll let me have a little error on that. But yeah, no, I think that I just want to just keep moving with what David was saying. So there's several things. So to give you a little bit of background. So I met Bud, I think my spring semester. I think I took the spring like intro American government course at Wheaton. And I actually remember one of the times that came in and he asked us about evangelicals. We looked at him like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you are one and you don't even know what you are, right? You know, kind of things, it's only Bud would do. And then through a paper that I wrote there, he kind of grabbed me and said, you got some potential here for doing grad. I wasn't unique in that. He was always on the lookout for people to go to grad school. And I think that, and one of the things that I found, moving forward, is that I got to know the Gang of Four over those years. He took us down to Midwest my freshman or sophomore year, and just took off from there. Got to know the Gang of Four over time and realized that they had a similar interest in reaching out to young scholars, students. And so I want to say a couple things, just, keep this about, not just about Bud, but about all of them. One of the things that I've been around academia now for 3 decades. You have, with the Gang of Four, 4 men of incredible integrity and compassion. The worst thing I've ever heard about them was that they were wanting, students to be too active in academia. That's it. I mean, that's the scandal, right? The scandal was a little too pushy about this. Or Bud asked me, someone said, Bud asked me if I was in Christians and political science. That's the worst thing I've heard. That's it. That's it. And on the other side, so if that's on one side of the scales, on the other side is what Dave mentioned, just a whole thing of scholars. And so I want to talk briefly about those. One is with the study of religion, right, and specifically religion politics. If you were to look at the scholarship before the Pew studies, before they did the NES, you're looking at surveys, and whether it's in the popular press or in grad school, it just didn't have the information that we have today. And so it's just commonplace now that we're going to have some kind of born again item on a survey, whether it's just a small survey or an exit poll. But the other belief items and the other things that go along with that. And so it's not only affected the scholarly scientific study of religion, but also the popular press as well. And so that you now have groups like from everything from Barna to PRI to Pew in between to a CBS poll is going to have religion items on it that are better than political science had for its first 30 years of surveys, right? And along with that, though, just also the substantive things, both in political parties, study of pastors, other things. One of the unique things that I enjoyed about watching the gang in action is that they had this kind of collaboration that they would work together, but it was always this kind of like tag teaming on different projects. Bud and Jim would be working on something, or John and Corwin would be, right, and they kind of each do different things. It wasn't just all in lockstep kind of things, but they got together and things, and really moved the state of the field forward in ways that's still lasting today. But I do think that just shared Dave's response, that I think one of the most lasting impact is going to be them as people and as mentors, both for me, and so, David, other ones that are here in the room, they're part of both that collective of things, right, that you have. I mean, even on a personal level, what, three of the gang's kids are political scientists at major universities today, right? Not bad, I mean, but yeah, no, but and the same here too. So there's a couple of students here from John Brown, whose professor is one of my students that was there. So same thing that David had. But yeah, no. I was worried about this was going to happen even before I saw Dave do this, and then I was like, I'm done. Yeah, no, I mean, beyond just like an impact that you have, like an entire career, one of the things that was very clear to me that you had, a lot of the people of us who are studying religion and politics come from religious backgrounds. Those aren't always welcome in academia, right? And so one of the things that happened, and I was in this golden age at Wheaton, but it was also connected with Calvin and other places, of the scandal of the evangelical mind, expanding out, moving into culture, being able to take a course with Mark Knoll and Bud, at things. And so being able to have that opportunity, and I didn't come from a family that lacked education or something, had their own thing, but it was still cloistered in a sense, right? And so being able to see that this is both a viable career, viable life of the mind, and be able to have that, and then have, here we are 30 years later, gainfully employed in academia and doing well. It's not just, for those of you who aren't, but Dave mentioned, this isn't just that there were people at that symposium that just have jobs somewhere. These are highly achievable, like high achievement, like to a person, at major universities, or if they're at liberal arts schools or doing things focused, where they've got tenure, they've got promotion, they've got careers, they've got their own things. And so if you just take that and then the multiple impact of that, David's analogy of that ripple effect, I think, is really key, and I think is done widely and done things in ways. I can think of 3 dissertations that I've chaired that are on religion and politics that, were just widely, they just wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there, if I hadn't been there from you guys. And so there's a whole group of people who have never even met you that are appreciate the work that you've done. But so, yeah, no, I thank you. David asked me if I was going up there, if I was going to do a roast. I'm more than happy to do that at drinks tonight. So, we'll do that. So we'll get good things. But for now, I think being just a little bit of seriousness, about serious gratitude from us, but also just recognizing, the long-term impact of your work. So thank you.
All right, we have some time now for questions. Riley, could I prevail upon you to grab the mic in the back? Would you be willing to be a microphone person? So if you have a question, and it is Q&A, not A&A, so make sure you've got the question ready. A little comment is fine. Actually, it'd be quite appropriate perhaps in this context. But would love to have a little time to ask our panelists like questions. And please let us know who you are as well.
Yeah, my name is Ken Woodward. When I was religion editor of Newsweek, I got wind of the Gang of Four, and I'm trying to fix something in my memory. And so one of you can perhaps tell me, when was it that, this is what I remember about you, first of all, that you created a new filtration system for understanding more exactly, I've mentioned before, making a distinction between Southern Presbyterians, for example, and Northern Presbyterians. And it seemed to me that this was a huge jump forward in a better understanding of denominational religion in this country. What book was that, or what study was that, and when was it? I had it tied to 1993 in the World Parliament of Religions, but I think I'm wrong on that.
Okay. I think it was the 1992 survey that we did that you cited in Newsweek, and there was also other aspects of that particular survey that had a lot of different belief questions that you reported on in Newsweek. But the thing you're alluding to in terms of denominational affiliation being much more precise in that, that's what Bud and John initially worked out in terms of their particular article in the 1993 book. But that's what led to the religious tradition, both concept and then measurement. Yeah. So, yeah.
Corwin and I made a trip in 1993 to Budapest. American politics, guys like me, I don't go to Budapest. I'm lucky to get out of DuPage County. And Wade Clark Roof, who'd participated in the pilot study, Corwin and I presented a paper on religious traditions, and also it was Reltrad and religiosity. Wade Clark Roof came up afterwards. He said, what you have here on religious traditions should be published in the American Sociological Review in the next issue. But what you guys have said about religiosity, I'm not so sure. And the problem was, of the 10 sociologists who were there, it turns out if you checked their Vedas, they all had different conceptions of religiosity. So they didn't like ours, and that was okay. That same trip, a rather minor event took place. Corwin and my wife and I were getting on a train to go to that crummy town of Vienna. And we were in the bottom of the Budapest train system, where English language is not very precise on the part of most people. And it turned out a dog got between my wife and I, and the door closed, and my wife was not on the train. So Corwin and I are on the train. Okay, what are we going to do? Corwin said, I'll get off at the next stop and come back. And you go where we were going and wait for her there. Eventually, my wife got out of the bottom of the train station and somehow grabs a taxi cab. But it turns out there are 4 train stations in Budapest. And which one was the one that was going to take us to Vienna? Well, she had no idea. And they're speaking English and Hungarian together. Well, my wife got dropped off at the proper train station. She's upstairs. I'm down in the bottom of the thing. My wife sees 2 Americans. You can always tell Americans when abroad, they look different. So they started talking English, and these 2 people said to my wife, does your husband have a blue sport coat on? And she said, yes. Well, he's downstairs in the bottom of the train station. So my wife and I got back together. There's a lot of stories about Bud where I've done some really stupid things over the years that everybody likes to regale me about these stories. That one comes up at least a couple times per year. But Reltrad, Wade Clark Roof, publish it immediately.
So if you think about the shifts in American religion over the time that you guys have been working together, really sort of comparing today to 40 years ago, to the 1980s, what would you say, in your view, is the biggest and most consequential shift in the American religious landscape? I'll say what I would nominate, and you guys may disagree. I'm just curious. It seems to me that the single most significant shift over that time period has been the collapse of mainline Protestantism. But maybe you have another candidate of something that you think has been more consequential over the period of your work, and what do you think is most different from when you started working to where we are today?
Well, I'll nominate something that's fairly obvious, and that's, I think, the impact of the so-called culture wars on political alignments. In the book that John Green and I edited back in 1991, we made a kind of prediction that the Republican and Democratic parties were going to begin sorting themselves out much more strongly than they already had, although it was already in process, between conservative religious people of all sorts on one side and more David Campbell's secular folks, broadly defined, or less religious people, along with religious liberals who we saw as a declining group because of the decline of the main line. And I think that's the prediction. In fact, I went back and read that our concluding article in that book the other day, and I think we did a remarkably good job of predicting what has transpired a quarter century or more later. And I think that's the most significant development that I see, that we really restructured our parties along very clear religious lines. And the decline of social class, you can't find income in your equations, making a difference across big samples anymore, whereas these cultural factors, largely rooted in religion, have become so powerful. And I think we're still working out all the ways that those things influence politics and political attitudes. The paper I gave today, I haven't quite figured out all the links between why some religious groups favor some kinds of military action and not others, but the differences are there, they're distinct, they're persistent, they survive multivariate analysis. There's something there to be figured out, and I think that's where we need to be going in the next generation, to figure out all of the different and complex ways that religion's perspectives, or on the other side, conscious secular perspectives of various sorts influence political choices.
Well, yeah, I think there's something to be said for the collapse of the mainline Protestant churches being very significant culturally and politically. Certainly, they were, I'll say, a moderating influence within American political life. They were also among the more civically minded as well. And so their decline has, I think, also contributed to this polarization within American politics as well. So I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
I'd go with the nuns and the decline in identification with religion on the part of people, beginning in GSS from 1989 and a steady progression since. David, I don't believe you, the three of you, would have written your book had something like this not happened. In other words, I don't mean to blow his horn, but I think David's book is one of the best pieces of social science done in recent years. And it just wouldn't have been done because there wouldn't have been the same thing to talk about. Now, a couple sociologists picked up on this in the early 21st century, and Houghton Fisher, and so we owe a lot to them to at least begin to document that kind of thing. But that would be, for me, the highlight.
Questions?
I have a question I'll address to the Gang of Three, even though you don't look Chinese. But it's as much addressed to any of your students. I respond to it. That is this. Given the kind of collegial relationship I have enjoyed for so long, and that I'm sure have been vital to your scholarly work as well as your happiness. Do you see anything like the survival of that quality of collegial relationships among younger scholars in your field or younger scholars that you know of? Do you see the community of scholars being replenished, regenerated, or do you notice some change in your personal observation?
Well, first of all, I retired 20 years ago, so I'm not observing what's going on in the way to really fully answer your question. It's a really good question. There's something that works against it, that the development of the kind of collegiality that you're talking about, and that is scholarly egos. People like to have their name in print, and they're not sure they really want to share it with others, their discovery, individual discovery. And so that's not easy to overcome. I see in my son, who's a professor at Texas A&M, and whose first publication came in an edited volume by John Green and Jim Guth, while he was an undergraduate student at Calvin working with Corwin. Now, my son is not a religion and politics scholar. Actually, he's a time series methodologist is really his prime thing. But what I see with my son, I see him working with graduate student after graduate student at Texas A&M. His work, a lot of his work, I mean, he's the senior person involved. His name will often be put last on the list of names for publication. And scholars can do that. If they're at big universities, it's harder at the schools we taught because we had only undergrads. There's an undergrad I'm looking at here. There was another undergrad who talked earlier. You can work with undergrads, but mainly working with undergrads is kind of encouraging them to consider graduate school as opposed to working together. Now, Tobin wrote a paper, gave it at a professional convention in St. Louis, as I recall. There were no Cardinal games for us to see at that time, or we would have maybe skipped your presentation and gone to the game. But I remember this. People reacted. They had no idea that he was still an undergrad. In other words, his presentation was high-quality stuff. Why? Because he'd worked his rear end off on the thing. So this can be done, and it probably needs to be done more.
Yeah, I think, and I'm still going to meetings, so I'll make comments, but I'm kind of impressed with the way in which collegial work has developed among many people in the discipline. I think it's so much more common than when we started out, when everything was sole authored and you were working pretty much on your own. I don't see a whole lot of that anymore. I see lots of group projects, and so I think there is a great deal of collegiality that takes place. Now, how long it lasts or how persistent the networks are that develop around some of these things that start in graduate school or early in careers, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of optimistic about that. I think that in some ways the academic world has, at least as I see it, among political scientists, has become more collegial than it once was.
Okay, we are about out of time. I want to invite you to join us tonight at 7:15 for the Henry Lecture with Michelle Kirtley, who is today. If you are attending the conference, dinner will be at 6 out here. I hope you've been encouraged by this session. I have been, and I learned a lot. And I get to work with Corwin, the office next door to me, when it's warm enough for him to bless us with his presence, otherwise further south. But I hope that you've been encouraged, and I would ask you to join me in expressing our gratitude to